All right, let me quickly get back to Mr. Green, because from what she just talked about, I mean, yes, some people have been disenfranchised because of pockets of violence and not being able to cast their votes and all of that. But let's look at the legal angle. I mean, what can they really do?
Let's put it this way: what does the electoral law say concerning that situation? Where the voters have been disenfranchised, not because of their own actions, but because of the actions of some, for now, unknown people, some outside intervention. What are the provisions of the electoral law for people like that?
I will answer your question directly, but I just want to react to what Yemi said in your Abuja studio. There's a line where she said that some of the things that occurred were not of INEC making. I beg to disagree. In the sense that we're talking about management of an election. You recall that when the president made his shoot on sight of ballot box snatcher statement, the INEC chairman came out forcefully to say that everything must be done in accordance with the Electoral Act. And people are praising the INEC chairman for that he is insisting on what the Electoral Act has provided for. There are provisions in the Electoral Act that govern practically every default that we're talking about here. For example, in the course of registration of voters, there are provisions in the Electoral Act that say that if somebody presents himself to vote, and I'm talking about underage registration, there are provisions that say that the officer who is conducting the registration on behalf of INEC must satisfy himself or herself that that person is of age, is of voting age 18 years. And that if he's not satisfied, he may require or request for a certification, a birth certificate, everything is stated there. So when you then have underage persons on the register, whose fault is that? Sometimes we say that it's the attitude of Nigerians, so they are the ones who pretend themselves. Some people who say that in the course of this debate, that sometimes neighbors who will know that certain persons were not of age will not alert INEC. I'm saying that the Electoral Act has made provision for that. Again, for voting, there are also provisions that say that if somebody who is not of age were to show up to vote, although he may have a card in his hand, the officials will also say, no, you're not of age. And if he is insisting that he's of age, he should call for authentication or mark the ballot paper differently. In fact, it's called tendering. It's a colored ballot paper that is different from the main ballot paper, the usual ballot paper, and all that. It will mark it that this person, to me, I don't think that is 18. So when you then have, as we've recorded, allegedly, in Niger State, underage voting, so whose fault is that? Is it the fault of the voters or what? So I think that because election is managed principally by INEC, so when things go wrong, there are no persons that we're going to be blaming for things going wrong other than INEC. That said, your question talks about what those who are disenfranchised, what remedies they may have and what right that they may have.
Yes.
First, under the Electoral Act, Section 26 that I'm referencing, INEC has the power to postpone an election ahead of an election if, as a result of breach of security or emergency or disaster or whatever, it fears that election shouldn't hold in the locality. And so that section allows INEC to conduct that general election without election being conducted in that locality. And if at the end of that election, INEC realizes that the election from that locality will not affect the outcome, the general outcome of the election. INEC can go ahead and declare the result and give a return, meaning that technically that segment of the voting population has been excluded from that cycle of election. Therefore, you can then say that those who legally can be by that way excluded will not have any recourse to sue INEC or do anything or to complain about, just because they were unfortunate to be in the position or in the location that is affected by emergency or whatever. But there are also other categories of those who may be disenfranchised, like those who, for example, have their cars in their hand, and then they are not properly guided. I've made reference to this earlier in the course of this discussion. When you have voters who were told that their polling unit were in one place, and then they went there, and then they couldn't find their name on the list, and then they went searching, second place, third place, and they couldn't find anything. For those category of voters, the law does not make any provision for them on what should happen to them. The only remedy they may have is that after the election, they will then have to sort the thing out with INEC administratively to ensure that next time they're able to vote. But there are also other categories of persons, including those who legitimately participated in the process, as we had yesterday in Okota, who unfortunately had their votes and the ballot papers being hijacked or destroyed or burnt by interveners, thugs, and all that. For those category of persons, what can they do under the law? Under Section 137 of the Electoral Act, there are two categories of persons that can sustain an election petition. A candidate in the election or a political party. So, meaning that after the election, these individuals who must have been disenfranchised cannot even bring an election petition because they have no local standing to do that. The next question, therefore, is, can they approach a court of law?
Now, some people have said that there was a strategic method to the disruptions that we saw in yesterday's election, and that those are the major talking points, that we should speak to those methods, those systemic disruptions that we saw in the elections yesterday. And I believe you understand what I'm saying. How should we engage that conversation?
Professor Dinkalu was on the show yesterday, and I watched him speak to that point. And I think what's important is there are speculations based on sort of evidence that of where different disruptions happen. But what's important is to map them. So as he said, if you have all your evidence, all the 120,000 odd polling units that we have are geolocated. So if you map every polling unit where there was an issue, then you can then, as he said, then you look at the story. What does the story say? And as he pointed out, the areas in Kaduna, in Nasarawa, and in Lagos that had issues of violence yesterday, not exclusively, but those areas are areas of where you had non-indigenous communities in those states. What does that mean? What does that say? What can we infer from that? It's important to look at that. In places like Rivers, where that was not the issue, what were the dynamics in that area that fostered the violence that we had and the non-voting that we had in certain local governments? Members of certain parties were from those areas. Could that be an issue? But I think it really is important in making conjectures and sort of trying to draw conclusions that it's done based on the facts that we have in front of us, and we say, okay, what are these patterns, and what can we say might be the basis for the pockets of violence that we have. And as Mr. Ogunye said, and I do agree that ultimately, since elections are the responsibility of our election management body, I just think it's very important that we do have holistic conversations around the challenges that we have around our elections. This is 2019, the challenges of logistics is not new. So from that, for example, for me, I think it's kind of disingenuous of INEC to talk about the sheer logistics of elections. Nigeria is Nigeria. The square meters hasn't changed. The number of polling units hasn't changed since 2015. That we're conducting elections over land and water has not changed. that we have a population that's deeply suspicious of ourselves and government institutions has not changed. Okay, yeah, we have more political parties, granted, 91. Yes, the sheer number of ballot papers you then have, because you have 73 presidential candidates, are more, 400 plus million pieces of paper, granted. But we cannot say we're surprised around the logistical challenges of running an election in Nigeria. Therefore, in the planning for that, one should be prepared. And for me, squarely, I put that blame at INEC's doorstep. You can't be surprised and then say share logistics. This is Nigeria. This is the dynamics of conducting an election in Nigeria in this time that we're in. I mean, in another 4 years, maybe we'll be looking at almost 100 million registered voters. Would INEC again say share logistics? So for those things, I think overall, yes, they're the election management body. Yes, ultimately, even the security apparatus is within INEC's control in a sense to focus on how security agencies are deployed. But I think we can't also shy away from the fact that in the years since we've returned to civilian rule, there really has been very few prosecutions and judgments given for electoral malpractices. So for a lot of us for Nigerians in a sense, we're really not that, what's it called? We don't have a very clear, strong sense that if you do certain things during elections, this is the penalty that you pay for it. You still get to run for office, your party is still listed, maybe a few INEC officials that were found guilty would go to jail. But ultimately, you don't think of an electoral violence or electoral offenses as something bad that you do. And as long as we don't prosecute and there's no deterrence, the violence and the issues that we have continue. And I think that's the point I'm trying to make, that yes, challenges with INEC, but I think we really need to look at security agencies, we need to look at political parties who mobilize people in a sense to come and vote and what role they play in scuttling the process in some situations. And also look at citizens, which for me have provided an excellent positive story from the elections. From Abuja to Lagos, you had citizens take control of their polling units, order people, give people numbers, make sure people stand in line, help people find themselves. I mean, Omoni Oboli is, for me, a great example of that in Lagos. She got to her polling units at 6 o'clock. I think past 12 was when they all went home, because she stayed till the end. And so as we talk about these things, I think it is extremely important to look at it in that sense. I mean, one of the things, for example, if we're talking about INEC, there are quite a number of people who their cards worked. They were verified, it was authenticated, but because their names were not on the voters' register, could not vote. Now, one of the ones that surprised me was that their names were on the one posted on the wall, but the copy that the INEC official had with them didn't have their name. But they were not willing to use their initiative and say, well, if you are on one copy, and maybe there was a printing error is why you're not in the copy in my hand, we will let you go ahead and vote and make a note accordingly. But that person wasn't allowed to vote. And as Mr. Ogunye said, unfortunately, there's really nothing that person can do. So I think that was really just the point I was trying to make around ensuring that it's not just a direct focus of INEC. They have quite a lot of blame in the matter, but also looking at other stakeholders in the process and the responsibility that we all share for having free, fair, and credible elections.
So what you're saying, in essence, is that the persistent thuggery and brigandage and dislocations during the conduct of elections in Nigeria is actually being encouraged by the weaknesses in the laws guiding the operations of INEC.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I'm not mistaken, it's Justice Uwe's report talking about setting up an electoral offences commission so that it can be a faster process of prosecuting electoral offenders and actually ensuring that there's judgment and examples made of them. Because if we don't have enough of that, and then tying that also to the role of the security agencies. Now, as we said in the Situation Room's report yesterday, in some polling units you had one official. In some you had as many as 10. Now, if you look at some of these issues, I think in Lagos, for example, they had come in, one of the polling units, they had come in first in a wave, and I think sort of assessed the place and say, okay, can we get away with disruption here? And then came back in larger numbers. Question then is, what were the security agencies looking at? There was one very poignant picture on Twitter yesterday that showed a youth corper, male, carrying a female youth corper while police officers were watching. And that polling unit had been scattered and they were really trying to get to safety. So I think also squarely what are security agents doing? What are they looking at when thugs come in? Polling units and elections are within neighborhoods. That's why we literally shut down the whole country to run elections, so that people can't move freely and therefore cause commotion, havoc freely. So in the dynamics of having people being mobilized and being able to come to a polling unit, which is technically not supposed to have more than 500 people per unit, and you have security agencies, you have citizens, also the dynamics of that and looking at that, where then do we begin to point at the issues and flag the issues around the fact that people come to a polling unit to vote and go home? Why must we turn it into a production?
All right, so what happened yesterday then suggests that the situation room today or the collation centers are more likely to be about arguments because of the disruptions that we saw yesterday than focus on crunching the numbers.
Well, I think we'll have both. I mean, the commissioner said they will address where the changes they're going to have this morning. But I think, the number crunching is going to go on because results are coming in. Collation is happening in wards. And so basically escalating it up the ladder of polling unit to ward, local government, state, and then a final declaration at the national level. So I think you will have a bit of both. But as the results continue to come in, people will then be focused on wanting to find out what the outcome of the elections are.
Well, I guess she's said quite a lot on that, and yeah, we'll just have to end it at that. Yemisi Ademolekun, thank you so much for your thoughts right there in our studios in Abuja on the 2019 general elections, from what, of course, she was able to observe right there. And in some other parts of the country.
Yes, and hopefully we believe that we'll get the chance to hear from you later in the day when some of these figures come in and you are able to more scientifically assess the situation. But in the meantime, we thank you for coming out at such an early time to be part of this conversation. Yemi Adamolekun is the Executive Director. Enough is Enough Nigeria. Thank you.